I'm down in our basement this morning where we store a whole lot of food. Beautiful preserves and canned food that Sasha makes. Ridiculous amounts of tomato sauce. It's just so nice to have this down here in this relatively cool space of our basement. Dried herbs for tea. We've got crates and crates of nuts, hazelnuts, black walnuts, English walnuts, dried chestnuts and hickories for all sorts of eating for the long term. A whole bunch of different homemade wines and vinegars and things like that. But I thought this morning what I would do is focus a bit on a tour of our pretty ragamuffin and simple root cellar that after a number of years is still working beautifully for us. So let's take a look. So I talked about this root cellar a number of times in past years. I built this a few years ago. It's 12 feet by 8 feet right here in our basement. I'll link throughout the video to different past videos that explain the build of this. But basically, I traded with a friend for a bunch of these panels and hung them in a very simple way from the joists in our basement. Really not a big deal. Used some duct tape so there's a little less air sneaking through. And after a bunch of years, it's still working perfectly well for us. And as I step into here, it's a lot cooler. In fact, this is a nice thing to see. Pretty high relative humidity. This shows the low and the high of humidity and temperature over the last 24 hours. So it holds reliably in the upper 70s humidity-wise and in the upper 30s temperature-wise. And so we let the cold air slide in each night in these incredibly low-tech ways. This is just drainage tube, 4-inch diameter drainage tube that's run through. This is an exterior window that's insulated and boxed off, has a little rodent mesh on the outside so they can't come in, and the cold air descends through this tube, so it almost feels like a fan is on right here. It's probably about 30 degrees or upper 20s outside right now, and so cold air is rushing in and dropping to the floor here. On this side, which is the north side, this is a window again to the outside with a tube coming in, rodent protection, and that tube up there is connected directly to the back of our wood stove. And so the wood stove makes a vacuum and draws the warm air from this space that's at the top and creates a vacuum that brings in even more cool air. So we basically have two cold air pumps that are completely passive, keeping this space refrigerator temperature. Between the scrap lumber that I used for this, a little bit of duct tape, and these panels, well, I traded for the panels, but if I were to buy them new, this would probably be $100 or $200 project. It ended up costing me about $20 to build this. It uses no electricity, and it's basically a 12-foot by 8-foot by 8-foot refrigerator for 6 months out of the year. And here we are in mid-January. We've got these beautiful cabbages from our good friend Eric out in the Hudson Valley. He's got a YouTube channel. I'll link to that here if you're interested. And we learned a trick with cabbages that you peel some of the outer layers off so that you've got nice, clean, healthy layers. A little ding here, there's no big deal at all. And if they're stored upside down in a root cellar, supposedly that keeps them in a good way longer. And we got these from him back in the fall. So here's some Chinese cabbages. Pretty nice for mid-January. And what we'll do, Sasha will go through and just take a look at them and pick out whichever ones look like they're moving along the most and use those first. That's a theme in the root cellar, is you're always kind of checking every week, where do you see a little bit of discolored leaves? So maybe this one gets used next. Peel a leaf or two off, send that to the chickens, and the rest should be good. It's kind of nice to have all that fresh greens to work with. These shelves are made out of pallets. This is where we've stored our potatoes for the last many years. Another little thermometer there at a different height just to see what's going on. Similar picture, right around upper 30s Fahrenheit and around 70% humidity here. So a little lower humidity, but that's good enough. These will store fine. And what we do is we take the potatoes that are the nicest looking, have the least blemishes or least dings, and we put them the furthest back. So back in here. Let's see if it'll, well, maybe not. Anyway, back in there is where the nicest ones are. So we'll use the ones that need to be used first. Any that have damage, we make sure that faces up so we can see it. We use those first. The green ones, we learned from a lot of you lovely viewers this year, can be used as seed. So ones that had green as we were bringing them in, we put off to the side. We're storing our seed potato here. We can plant those out next year. It's pretty amazing how far these potatoes will last. We need to donate some of these or trade with folks, because for Sasha and I, especially with COVID times, we're having less dinner parties, pretty much no dinner parties, and so this is a huge amount of potatoes. This will get us all the way to spring, no problem, with excess, so we can plant those out. Maybe next year we can grow a little less potatoes, because that's just a little too much. And it's worthwhile showing some aspects to this that I think I wouldn't call failures, but I would call not the best practice. So for example, these two crates we harvested purple top turnips and black Spanish round radish about a month ago. And I think both Sasha and I knew that we should have got them all oriented upright and actually banked into moist sawdust or soil, but we just didn't have time. And so they're in here, they're fine, but you can see it's getting a little bit soft, still certainly usable, but you know, here the black Spanish round radish in particular feels like it very much gets soft. Worst case, we can chop them up and send them to the chickens, but lesson learned, we need to bank these in sawdust if they're going to last quite a while and keep their moisture up like they should. This is kind of crazy and fun. These are carrots that we put in here back in August in sawdust. It was too warm in here until we got into winter, so they sprouted like crazy. Sasha chops these up and cooks them too. And buried in sawdust, they actually are still in good shape. Considering these went in August, they're really quite still nice. They're dry, but they haven't shrunk or gotten, you know, funky in that way. And down on the ground here where we've watered these crates of carrots a few times, these are from July and they're in beautiful shape. Really, really nice. And the ones that our friend Eric gave us not too long ago are quite nice, even though they're not buried in sawdust. He never washed them, he left all the soil on them, and so they're in beautiful shape. So once in a while we bring a watering can down here and just water these root crops to keep them healthy and alive, and they should get us all the way to spring, no problem. We'll take a more thorough look at these crates in another video, but basically each one of these crates has anywhere from a few hundred to many thousand seeds for our nursery. So for example, here's a crate that is filled with peach seeds. There's hundreds and hundreds of peach seeds in here. And we store these basically for the nursery for cold stratifying seeds. We can store them down in this root cellar in these folding crates to keep rodents out. And it's basically another huge refrigerator space, but without any need for electricity. So it's incredibly helpful. And it's nice that there can be a little bit of a blurred line between what is nursery and what is food storage for us. So I'll probably put around, I don't know, somewhere around 3,000 to 4,000 chestnuts that were harvested this fall into moist sawdust, which keeps them very alive and viable. So we can plant these in the spring for the nursery, but it also keeps these plump, beautiful chestnuts here that we can bring upstairs, slice and put on the wood stove and have roasted chestnuts throughout the winter. So we'll eat to our heart's content and then plant out the rest. And just like a refrigerator, this is a great place to store ferments for the long haul. These are all various amazing hot sauces and fermented jalapeno pickle slices that Sasha made in the late summer, and they can rest here through the entire winter. We eat a lot of hot sauce, and if you watch that root ferment video from Sasha a few weeks ago, that's it right here. So she put some in the fridge for us to enjoy, but down here it can rest and evolve and deepen. So it's a great kind of context to store sauerkrauts and long-term brines and ferments too. There's really no big complexity in building this space a number of years ago. I just took the northeast corner of our basement, it was the coolest corner we had, and framed out with these basic insulation panels. Maybe you can find some used ones, maybe you can use other creative material. This is all curtain framing, I guess it's called. Basically, they're just hanging from the ceiling. There's no real quality structural carpentry going on. Basic wooden frame for the door to hold the panels, and some old tubes run to the outside to let the cold air slide in when it's cold enough to run this whole system. Completely passive, pretty darn resilient. It turns on in the fall and off in the late spring and gives us an amazing sense of food security. This is here whether or not the electricity is on or off. And we reliably get winters, so we will reliably have a root cellar most years, if not every year, for 6 months. So yeah, certainly ways it could be more elegant or more efficient. Could definitely dial in and refine how we store some of those root crops. But as a basic concept, I feel really great about our root cellar. If you have a basement, maybe it's finished, maybe it's not, maybe you can have a smaller space or a larger space, but I'd strongly encourage, if you've got a cool winter or a cold winter, to think about framing out a very simple structure for yourself and start learning how to work with it. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you've got, and I'm sure there's some great feedback folks have. What ways could we be making this better or refining it? Let us know. What sort of roadblocks or challenges or questions do you have that are holding you back from thinking about building something like this if you do have access to a basement? And let's keep adding more resiliency and storage, caching those delicious things for our families and friends. Thanks for watching.